Welcome back to Museum Roadshow. I'm Amy Degerstrom, the director here at the Becker County Museum. Last week we listened to Edgar Ewalds, who talked to us about being a long-term employee at Bell Telephone. So let's listen in and hear a little bit more of Edgar's story.
The operators in Detroit Lakes handled all the calls in the beginning, and because they were adding all these telephones to this system here in town, you got to be able to call more people. So the price went up on how much you charged the individuals for the phone service. But in that same transaction, we had to have some more telephone operators. So as time went on, my wife, she became a telephone operator. And what an operator. I got married to her. And then because of the volume, the telephone company was basically on, you probably have heard the word Ma Bell. Telephone company was a family. And in their perspective of everything was, every individual that had a phone was a very important person. And some of them that didn't have phones, they wanted them to be an important person. So the operators were basically the brunt of all communications for the telephone company, because you would pick up your phone and it would go to the operator and they would say, "Number please, what can I do for you?" And that was the voice with a smile, we used to say, because they had to be pleasant all the time, no matter what. And sometimes I know it probably was very hard for them to communicate this nicely to maybe how people talk to them. But in my time frame, I never heard anything really bad about any of the operators getting involved with a customer. The telephone company and the mechanics of it, we had to have a distinguishing ring for some of these people to make it more livable type of thing. Because in like the farmer lines and those there, the electronics or the mechanics and the electrical part of it, they couldn't separate rings. So basically, if you were on one of those party lines, you maybe would hear every ring that was on that line. And so that some people called them nosy, and some of them were called rubbernecks, and some of them they knew everything that was happening to everybody and anybody. It wasn't a secret in the community. So then they decided to work on this thing where you could put more people on a line. So then they divided the ringing system up into most everybody that had it back in those days. It was J, W, M, or R. And then they went from that to J2, M2, R2, W2, and this here type of thing, so that they could distinguish who you were calling. And some telephone lines, that would be like 8-party line. Then some of them added more people onto that line because they were right close by, or they were just on the edge. They'd have to build a little farther for them, and it was easier to connect them up. So then you would wind up with a J3 or an R3, because that ring would be 3 rings. And then they went to that type of thing, but they tried to restrict it to 8 people on a line as the maximum. The farmers had a lot more people on one of their lines than that. And it got to a point that the Bell system, or the telephone company, could not go out, and if you had your phones and all of this, they couldn't go out and take that away from you and go in there. These little companies that were out there had to have a board meeting of those telephone people to decide whether they wanted to go to Bell or not. And most of them did, because for one thing, they were responsible for their own telephone lines to maintain them and repair their own phones and this here. And so as this gradually crept on, that meant more people calling. And so it wound up then they didn't have enough operators, so they had to add more switchboards to the telephone office. The original office that I knew of was on 101 Pioneer Street, and they had to kick the business office out of there because they had needed the room for more switchboard for operators to work on it. And as that grew, then they moved their business office over to in the corner of the Greystone Hotel on State and Lake Avenue. We wound up getting what we call a construction supervisor. His first office was in the Masonic Lodge over on Lincoln, Frazee Street. But it wasn't quite big enough, and I don't know all the details on it. So his office got moved up above Adolph's Electric when they put that addition on their building over there. Then after that move took place, then we were building cell phone lines, and you have to have engineers to design them. So they moved engineering into Detroit Lakes. Then they made this northwest section here, Detroit Lakes District. So that meant we had more people here in town, more phone service. It just keeps on growing, you know.
Thanks for joining us on Museum Roadshow. Come back again next week and we'll hear the rest of Edgar's story about working here for the telephone company in Detroit Lakes.